Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you today. And thank you, Dr. Clayton, and your colleagues at the Office of Research on Women's Health for the invitation to join this extremely important session. It's a real honor for me. In fact, it's personal. NIH has been part of my career from the get-go. My first paycheck after graduate school came through an NIH-sponsored clinical trial, the largest one ever at the time, the multiple risk factor intervention trial, commonly known as Mr. FIP. Now, I was the project director for the San Francisco project site, and one of the things I was responsible for was recruitment. We recruited men, only men, to participate in this primary prevention trial on cardiovascular disease. And we trained recruiters to explain to men and women that everything that would be discovered about preventing heart disease in men would, of course, apply to women too. Now that strikes everyone I talked to today, and actually people at the time, as just nuts. Doesn't make any sense at all. And it didn't make sense. And yet it was the scientific consensus of the day. Science changes all the time. It's one of the challenges we have right now in talking about what we know and what we don't know yet about the pandemic and about vaccines and about so much that ails people. Science is now, and science will be tomorrow. I'm pretty excited to have been part of the NIH journey, if you will, for a very long time now. And I'm proud of the fact that I've been part of it as NIH has repeatedly met the moment. Right now, meeting the moment means overcoming the pandemic and preventing the next one. But it also means improving the recognition and support and trust in science that we hear so much about today. And I will be talking about that in my remarks. But first, a little more about the moment 30 years ago when NIH stepped up. 30 years ago, we were at a pivot point in our nation's failure to recognize the importance of women's health and women's health research. The urgent focus wasn't brought, and ultimate change wasn't brought on by a pandemic, of course, but by women's health advocates who urged women leaders in particular in Congress to demand change, and they did. They brought about enormous progress, which has been carried on over the years through leaders like Dr. Clayton, and starting with the first director of the office of what is now called the Office of Research on Women's Health, my friend Vivian Penn. In the Congress, a bipartisan group of women who included Congresswoman Morella, Senator Snowe, she was Congresswoman at the time, Congresswoman Schroeder, and their ringleader, Senator Barbara Mikulski. Here you see Senator Mikulski as she is making remarks on receiving an award from Research America a few years ago. And she recalled the days when it was 10,000 male medical students who were testing the famous take an aspirin a day, keep a heart attack away. She was pretty riled up, known for being riled up and for getting results. And she, along with her colleagues, marched out to the NIH, they actually took a taxi, and had a meeting with then Director Bernadine Healy, and change started happening. Lots of others were involved in meeting that moment. I am really proud of the fact that I was there urging folks on at the time as well. There were groups like the Society for Women's Health Research with its renowned founder, Florence Hazeltine, one of the greats of NIH's robust history of leadership. And I already mentioned Dr. Vivian Penn. This office and NIH overall has accomplished so much to be proud of over the last 30 years, but we all know there's much more challenge out there. When you think about the appalling level of maternal mortality in this country, especially among women of color, there's so much more that we need to understand and then put into action. Sadly, there's still a very high level of harassment, sexual harassment across the research community, and that needs to end. Progress is great, but it needs to stop. And last but not least, in my book, the incredible importance of overcoming challenges to diversity and inclusion in our society overall, but including in the scientific community and in healthcare. So there are those and many, many more challenges. So thank God we have the Office for Research of Women's Health. I want to talk about Research America for just a moment. We were formed in 1989 to meet the moment. It was a time that the Congress was not as strong as it had been previously in funding NIH and in doing everything within its power to assure that NIH and industry working hand in hand would meet the moment and find the solutions to what ails us. So a group of individuals that included Jack Whitehead, who had also founded the Whitehead Institute at MIT, and Ted Cooper, who had for so long been the leader of then National Institutes of Health, the National Heart Institute. They and others came together to form Research America, and it remains to this day a robust alliance of stakeholders across the community, from academia, industry, patient groups and nonprofits, scientific societies, and foundations, and various state and local organizations. We act together, we speak with one voice. Advocacy is about many voices with a shared message, driving for change, meeting the moment. The ways we work are, I think, familiar to many of you, and they're not unique to Research America. Again, the best advocacy is in alliance with many, many others, many voices making the case. One of the things we do and have for a long time is commission public opinion surveys, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to underscore the point about partnerships and alliances, whether it's with the public and private sectors working together. And we have examples right now like Operation Warp Speed, or whether it's about public and private with patient communities very much engaged. That didn't used to be the case. It certainly wasn't 30 years ago, but it's the state of the art now. And thank goodness, because that will help power research going forward to have the patient's voice at the table from the get-go. My friend Don Berwick wrote a powerful essay in JAMA back in June, seems like a million years ago, just June though, about meeting the moment. And he talked about the new normal and about taking a role personally and as a leader in assuring that what comes next is about choices we make now, the right choices. It really resonated for me, and I hope for you as you think about your role as leaders, and you all are. What kind of choices am I talking about? Certainly choices to make sure that women's voices are at the table and that women's health research is a robust, a vital component of the NIH agenda. But there's many other choices, those we make every day, and those that we make to assure that voices that haven't been heard will be heard now. We're at a tipping point in so many respects in our nation right now, and all of us, all of you, have choices to make now that are going to make a big difference for hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going forward. I mentioned public opinion survey data. We know from a very recent survey we commissioned, that was in August of this year, that we're now in the level of urgency, not just important, but we're now at a level of urgency in terms of public demand that we place a higher priority on science in this nation. Now you can see here that that's a bipartisan demand across parties and independents based on what we've been experiencing, living through with horror, the pandemic that has taken so many lives and caused disruption and has implications that we're going to see lasting for years and years to come. It's time to put science to work at the level it can deliver. Public sentiment, which I just referred to there, is what we're talking about. And that's what decision makers ultimately are responsible to. Public sentiment, to the voter, to advocates who speak up, exercising their constitutional right to be heard, to petition the government. Abraham Lincoln said this best, I think, that public sentiment is, frankly, everything. Without it, nothing can succeed. And that's the reason that we have, for many years now, been commissioning public opinion surveys to help our members, to help us, to help every advocate, to know what's on the minds of the American public, the good news, the bad news, the messaging that works, and that's confusing or undercuts trust when it's intended to sustain it. So our methodology, that of our vendors, I should say, because we don't actually conduct surveys, we commission them. But our methodology is the same as those others use, whether they be Pew or Kaiser or Gallup or any number of others. Not all the news is good in these surveys. We see, and you've seen it elsewhere and heard a lot of coverage and probably have a lot of concern about declining belief in the benefit of vaccines and hesitancy in saying whether one would take, for example, a COVID vaccine. Personally, I believe that we're going to see a surge in demand among people who want this vaccine. They've had enough of death and illness in their own families and their communities. But we shall see, time will tell. There's been a trend over the last several years of declining belief in the value of vaccines. That's a very serious challenge for the science community because vaccines without vaccinations aren't going to help. It's time for all of us to take time to be a leader, to be a clear voice on the value of vaccines. Now, I talked about urgency earlier. We asked in this survey back in August about 20 or so issues and asked people to rank them in terms of the priority level for the nation. Now, I'm just showing you the top 6 responses. Obviously and expectedly, as we expected, ending the pandemic came in number 1, but it was essentially the same, in the same rank order as finding new ways of preventing, treating, and curing other illnesses. And although we've combined urgent and high priority here, I'm here to tell you that urgent was over 50%. Urgent. That's mandate language. That's pay attention, decision makers. Do more to help us in the research community, in the innovation community, achieve medical progress. We also asked, and you see that in the red bar, whether people felt that science could help in achieving the answers, finding the solutions in each of these areas. And the percent that said science can help a lot is also shown here. So there isn't any question, despite what you may suspect or have heard elsewhere, the public, the American public, continues to support science. Let me talk about that a little more. This is Pew data. And it shows early in the pandemic, this was April, the most recent data here is April of 2020, that US adults say they have a great deal, and you can see that rising, a great deal of confidence in scientists and medical scientists in particular to act in the best interests of the public. This far eclipses the other groups shown here. And actually, it's been true for many years. It's just we're seeing a surge, or Pew recorded a surge just since the pandemic began. We saw this too in that August survey. And you can see here nurses, doctors, and scientists coming in at the top in terms of same kind of question, confidence to act in your best interest. That's really what it's all about, acting in the best interest of the public, serving the public's interest. That's what you do, that's what we do, that's what all of our partners do together. And articulating that, living it, breathing it, is what Meeting the Moment right now is all about. Now, my hypothesis, which there's some data on at least, is that even as trust in institutions is steadily declining, and that's true in data from many organizations, still trust in individuals is increasing. And I think because of this, it's the individuals who are going to lend credibility and increase trust to institutions. It means putting a human face on the institution. Literally, making sure that when we show and talk about institutions, we're not looking at buildings, but we're looking at people, because it's the people who are the conveyors, the purveyors of trust and confidence. Now, we've learned over the years that a shockingly low percentage of the public can't name a living scientist. By this, I mean that science is essentially invisible to the public. We got to change this. Now, there's been some good news, and thank you, Tony Fauci, for driving that. We've seen an increase. You can see here who people do name when they say they can name a living scientist. And this is, let's underscore it, August of this past year, this same year. But the shocking to me thing is that 71% of Americans don't even try. They don't even guess. They don't name someone who's dead, Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking. They just say, no, I can't name a living scientist. Despite the fact that someone who might be a scientist, but never self-identified, could be living in their neighborhood, have a child in the same school or play group. There's a lot of ways that scientists end up hiding out when we should be much more prominent. Now, the news is also not great when people are asked to name a place, any place, where medical or health research is conducted. This is not a hard question. Now, this is pre-pandemic question, and we will be asking it again next month, in January 2021, and I hope we'll see another surge. There was previously quite an increase from 35% to 53% over a couple of year period. I don't know exactly why that was, but we're going to see whether it holds up and even strengthens going forward. But still, it's shocking that only about half of Americans can name anywhere that research is conducted. Again, I underscore the point. It's invisible, too invisible. And finally, in this series of invisibility, the unfortunate reality is that 2/3 of Americans don't know that medical research in the US is conducted in all 50 states. They don't know that it's right there at their state university. They don't know that it's right there at the medical center in the closest city. That's a problem, one that we need to overcome and can overcome if we set our minds to it. We can change these metrics, and with it, we can put a more human faces on the conduct of science. It's the people who are going to drive this and assure that we maintain the public's trust. So I want to charge you to think about what you're going to do to meet the moment in the months and years ahead to increase the visibility of science. You can do that by telling your story. You can do that by listening. You can do that by inviting conversations, including those about skepticism. After all, scientists are trained to be skeptical. So why should we be critical of members of the non-science public who express skepticism? It's a good thing to ask why, or can I really trust what you just said, or tell me more. Encourage skepticism. Meet people where they are. Say, we have that in common, being skeptics. You're thinking like a scientist. I do think that we need to modernize the relationship between scientists and the public. I think it would be a healthy thing if every graduate science student learned in a systematic way, not just at an optional workshop, but as part of the curriculum, how to participate in public engagement, how to be an effective communicator, how to convey trust, how to talk about certainty and what isn't certain yet, how to talk about what we know now and what we're going to know with your support, with public support in the days ahead. We've made so much progress. Women's health research has made so much progress. People take it for granted now that women are full participants in studies. It wasn't always thus, but it is now. There's much more to do. And not only for women's health, for science broadly, science for the future of our nation. It's time for a science-strong future in the US and globally. We can get there. I think a big part of it is putting your face on research, meeting the moment personally. We like to say that the most important 4 words a scientist can say and convey with your attitude, with your willingness to listen, with your willingness to work together with people. The most important 4 words are, I work for you. I work for you. Not saying I'm a geneticist, I'm a virologist, but rather saying I work for you. And let the conversation go where the other person wants most to take it. It's a privilege to work for others, to serve the public's interest. I feel that privilege every day. I'm not a scientist myself, but I work for you, and so does Research America. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, to be part of this celebration, and to be part of what comes next under the leadership of all of you. And I say again, thank you.